Welcome to Living Well with MS Coffee Break, a part of the Overcoming MS podcast family, made for people with multiple sclerosis interested in making healthy lifestyle choices. Today, you'll meet someone living with MS from our global Overcoming MS community. Our guests will share their personal perspective on the positive and practical lifestyle changes they have made which have helped them lead a fuller life. You can check out our show notes for more information and useful links. You can find these on our website at overcomingms.org/podcast. If you enjoy the show, please spread the word about us on your social media channels. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. So, get your favourite drink ready and let's meet our guest. Welcome to the Living Well with MS Coffee Break. In this episode of the Coffee Break, we welcome Lieza Vanden Broeke. Lieza is the OMS ambassador for Christchurch, New Zealand. Lieza grew up in Belgium and lived there for 12 years before her family decided to move to Christchurch, New Zealand. In her teenage years and early 20s, Lieza was a competitive horse rider. Because of her studies, she gave up horse riding and took up running as a way to de-stress from university. In 2015, while studying for her PhD, Lieza was diagnosed with primary progressive MS at the age of 25. In October 2019, Lieza went to work and live in Hong Kong for 1 year. Thanks to Facebook and a fellow OMSer, this is where her OMS journey began and when she realised that overcoming MS was a possibility. Lieza returned to Christchurch, New Zealand, and in October 2020 she experienced her first bout of optic neuritis. Since then, Lieza has regained her sight, returned to full-time work and seen improvements in walking and has even made progress with her running. So, to start off with, could you describe your life before your MS diagnosis?
So in my early 20s, I used to be a runner and I did 2 half marathons and 3 full marathons. And when my dad and I used to practice on our trail runs, I'd fall over on over tree roots sometimes and we'd just laugh about it and say I was clumsy. But then during my last half marathon, I noticed some strange symptoms. I had blurry vision while I was running and I couldn't judge distance or depth very well. And I'd slur my words and find it hard to concentrate. And my legs and feet would feel heavy. So
how did you find out from that you had MS, that it was MS causing this?
Yeah. So during my last half marathon, when I was feeling all these symptoms, I had completed 18 kilometres kind of fine. I was doing it with my sister. And then the last 3 kilometres, well, I'll get to that. So after 18 kilometres, I could no longer run straight or see properly. And my sister had to hold my hand to help me run in a straight line. And the people on the course actually ended up stopping me because they noticed something was wrong. And they gave me lollies and water and told me to sit down. And they were going to call the ambulance for me. But the ambulance was actually busy somewhere else on the course.
So so from the UK, that's near the finish, isn't it? So what's a half? Because to us, 13 miles would be a half marathon. So 21's the whole kilometers. Distance. So you're really close to the end. Then.
Yeah. Okay. I was very close to the end. And so the ambulance was busy somewhere else on the course. And because I was so close to the end, I asked them, can I just finish, walk and finish the half marathon? And so off I went with my sister. They let me complete or continue. And I walked for a bit. Then I started running again and the same thing happened. So we went back to walking. And then because I didn't want to walk through the finish line, I ran the last 100 metres through the finish line. But that was the last time I ran.
Right. So and then full on symptoms, but you just thought I have to run just to get just because it looks better. I've only done one marathon, but I maybe had some minor MS symptoms at the time, but completely unknown to me. And that was pretty hard to run through the finish line then, actually. That's quite amazing persistence just to think I'm going to run it anyway. So so what went on from there?
So that was in June of 2016. And then, of course, after the weird things that had happened to me, I spoke to my GP and she referred me to lots of specialists and I got lots of tests done, but no answers. So my family finally paid for a private neurologist appointment. And then when I met with the neurologist and explained my symptoms to him, he mentioned something about Utrecht phenomena, but that was all. And of course I asked Google and I found out that people who experience Utrecht phenomena don't necessarily have MS. So that's what I was hoping for, that I didn't have MS. But so in November of that year, I was booked in to get my MRI scan. And then so I got my MRI scan. A few weeks later, I saw my neurologist again. And he said, I think you have MS. But in New Zealand, I don't know if it's like this everywhere. They need to confirm your MS diagnosis with a spinal tap. Like the MRI by itself isn't enough. Is that the same?
That's the same here. It does differ. I think not everyone in the UK has. We call it a lumbar puncture now.
Yeah.
I actually prefer Spinal Tap because it's one of my favourite films. But
I didn't even know it was a film.
Oh, you need to watch it. Separate conversation. It's normally confirmed. I think that there's some bands that they can spot in the lumbar puncture, but certainly, I mean, I was definitely told that basically you have to confirm MS by ruling out everything else that it could be. So there's no blood test for MS. They can't just say, give us a blood test, you have MS. They have to basically go through endless things to rule out. So we have to have tests on our eye reaction times. So that's something they can use. So they use like a body of different things to try and say, well, it's clearly not lupus or other things that it could potentially be. So yeah, similar. But yeah, we call it lumbar puncture normally.
Yeah. So 4 days before Christmas 2016, I got my lumbar puncture. And then shortly after, I got my diagnosis of primary progressive MS. So Merry Christmas to me. So I was 25 at the time.
So what was it like then after that? I mean, especially coming up to Christmas, what was it like after your diagnosis was confirmed?
Well, my symptoms weren't really bad. Like I couldn't run, but I could pretty much do everything else. So I thought, not the end of the world. And I just continued living my life. So at the time I was diagnosed, I was in my first year of my PhD in medical physics. So it never even crossed my mind to quit. I just kept going. And as I mentioned before, I'm very stubborn and I like to live my life on my own terms. So after my diagnosis, I traveled to many different countries because I love traveling. So I went to China. I went to 2 weddings in India. I traveled through India and Nepal. I visited my family in Belgium because that's where I was born, and Lithuania. I have some family there. I went to a conference in Sweden and I finished my PhD. I could walk fine, but I couldn't run anymore. And then fast forward a year and a half to 2019, October 2019, and I got asked to go to Hong Kong for 1 year to live and work there on kind of the same thing I was doing my PhD on in New Zealand, but just continue it as a postdoc in Hong Kong. And I loved Hong Kong, but the temperature and humidity is very different to New Zealand. So I guess my system was in a bit of shock. But when I arrived there, it was autumn, so it wasn't actually too hot. So I hadn't experienced the summer. But then in January 2020, on Chinese New Year, we found out about the coronavirus outbreak, and Wuhan, which was the centre of the outbreak, was 900 kilometres away from Hong Kong. So it's kind of scary.
So how did that, I mean, that as much as anything apart from MS, how did the pandemic affect you being in Hong Kong?
Well, ever since my diagnosis, so I couldn't run anymore, but I still loved being active. So I used to go to a gym to do strength training, but of course, COVID pandemic shut down all the gyms. So I couldn't go to my gym anymore. And my walking deteriorated really bad, was probably partly due to the stress of COVID as well, not just the lack of gym. So walking 500 metres from my apartment to the bus stop was a real struggle. Walking downhill was awful. My legs would shake and they would feel like jelly. So stress and everything made my MS symptoms all of a sudden worse.
And how did you come across overcoming MS then from there?
So at that, well, when my symptoms started getting worse in Hong Kong, I was alone. So I didn't have anyone. I kind of felt hopeless. I was experiencing something that I'd never experienced before. So I turned to Facebook, MS support groups on Facebook for help and advice. So I joined quite a few of them, but I found them really depressing and they were negative, people complaining about their symptoms and saying, oh no, my life is awful. That made me feel even more hopeless, and I just thought my life was downhill from there. And then Facebook actually suggested a group called Overcoming MS to me. And I joined, not fully knowing what it was. I just liked the name. So Overcoming MS. I was like, I want to overcome MS. And the first few posts that I read had people being really kind and helpful. So I was hooked. And then soon after, I actually met up with a member from the Overcoming MS Facebook page who also lived in Hong Kong. And she explained the 7-step Overcoming MS recovery program to me. And she had been following MS since her diagnosis. And she told me that she'd managed to shrink some of her lesions. And I thought, cool, I want to shrink my lesions too, get me into that. So after meeting her, I followed the diet part of MS 100% straight away, a few hours after meeting her. I was taking 50,000 IU of vitamin D a month, so not enough. But I exposed myself to the sun as much as I could because UV indexing in Hong Kong is quite high.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with not enough. I mean, 50,000 IU sounds low if you're in New Zealand or the UK, but actually if you're in Hong Kong, I mean, potentially you might not need to take any because you could just get, a half an hour of sun in Hong Kong and most days would probably be as much as us taking 10,000 IU a day because I'm currently in cold indoors getting zero vitamin D from the sun. So, yeah. So I think, and that's the thing with vitamin D, I mean, people always say how much, and it's different for everyone, isn't it? So
yeah, that's so true.
You probably just need to get yours checked to what your levels are, but yeah. Sorry, go on. And you were saying what else you were doing?
Yeah, so I bought some resistance bands, and I did some resistance training in my tiny apartment. I had bought some flaxseed oil, so I was taking 2 tablespoons of that a day. And my friend that I met on the OMS Facebook page made me go to yoga with her. Yeah, so originally I wasn't really seeing any changes from OMS, but from everything my friend had told me is that I could expect it to take a really long time, like even years. So I just kept going.
Yeah, they say, don't they, it's like turning around an oil tanker. You can't, oil tankers don't turn around instantly.
Yeah.
It's a very slow process. And that's definitely the way I saw it at first. I thought, I'm not expecting anything. If I expect, some things you take a tablet and then instantly you'll see a change. But I knew that wasn't going to happen. I think you have to have faith that that's not something that's going to happen. It's going to be slow, incremental changes.
It's easier to have something fast and instant.
Yeah. You take a tablet that stops a headache, and the headache stops. Then
it's easy.
So from there, was it all plain sailing and improvements onwards?
So I was still in Hong Kong at this point, but I had declined the offer to extend my contract because my health was more important, I thought. So I went back to New Zealand. And at this stage in Hong Kong, everything was just a struggle. Every move that I made had to be calculated, like, was it worth it? Am I going to have to pay for it for the next couple of days? I remember even buying souvenirs for my family. That was awful. Like, I didn't have to go far, but I couldn't do it. So I was happy to go back to New Zealand because I'd have my family and my boyfriend, and the weather would be colder. So in New Zealand, during the coronavirus, coming into the country, you can only come in if you're a resident or a citizen, and you have to do 2 weeks of hotel isolation. So I thought, that's okay, I'll get 2 weeks of rest. And I'd even, organise all my meals to be OMS friendly. I'd ordered some flaxseed oil from the local health food store. So I thought life was going to be really good. And then I completed 1 week of my managed isolation, and I was reading in my room, and the vision in my left eye started to go blurry. And a few minutes later, I couldn't see anything with my left eye. So I was experiencing, I didn't know this at the time, but my first bout of optic neuritis. So optic neuritis is often associated with an MS relapse, but I was diagnosed with primary progressive MS, so I'm not meant to have relapses, or so I thought. So I was given a 5-day course of oral steroids.
So you're still in isolation at this point? You're in a hotel room on your own? Okay, yeah.
So no one could touch me. So a neurologist I had to call one over the phone, and she prescribed me the steroids. And I ended up getting some vision back in my eye within a few weeks. So at this stage, I was back at home. I'd finished a managed isolation. I was at home with my family, my boyfriend, and my eye was recovering more every day. And I thought, yay, I'm through the worst. But MS had other plans, very unpredictable. So before the steroids, I could walk what looked like normally. So downhill was a struggle, but flat, not for a long time, was normal. And after the steroids, I couldn't walk in a straight line. My balance was all over the place. and my legs felt even more like jelly, and I had a limp. Yay. So I'm not blaming the steroids. It was just probably the natural progression of my MS. But yeah, it was awful. I didn't feel like myself, but as I told you earlier, I'm very stubborn.
So have things continued to get worse and decline as well?
So nearly everything that I'd read and heard about MS is that once you start getting worse, there is no way to get better at the level we used to be. But I really trusted OMS. So I kept following OMS, and I followed it even more closely. So I upped my vitamin D because I was now back in New Zealand, in Christchurch, not in Hong Kong. I upped it to 10,000 a day instead of my 50,000 a month. I started supplementing with magnesium. I started meditating, and I went back to the gym. So in Hong Kong, I had a personal trainer. So I used what I had learned from him, and I started training myself. So I did strength training mostly by myself, but I like doing checks every once in a while to see if my MS is improving or not. So what I would do is at the end of my session, I would walk on the treadmill. And when I first started walking on the treadmill, treadmills are very narrow. So I had to hold the sides with both hands as I walked 5 minutes or even less. And then eventually I moved on to doing one hand for 1 minute, another hand for another minute. I did that for a few months. Then I did one finger with one hand, one finger of the other hand, did that for a few months. And then now I can walk without holding on to anything for 5 minutes. So that took about 6 months for me to see that difference. And then, once I came back from Hong Kong and my eye recovered, I started working back full-time at the medical imaging company that I had worked for prior to moving to Hong Kong. And parking is kind of bad where I work. So, because there's at the university, lots of students that steal my car parks. So I had to walk 1 kilometre roughly to work every day and 1 kilometre back. So don't forget that I had a limp at this point and I couldn't walk straight. My legs felt like jelly. So that 1 kilometre was awful. My limp was so noticeable. It used to really upset me walking to my car and to work because I thought everyone was looking at me, judging me, wondering what was wrong with me. And then, so after I'd finished my job for the day, I'd go to the gym. I went 3 times a week. I didn't feel like going, but I did it because I knew that would be good for me. And then I'd come home after work and gym and I'd cook myself an OMS-friendly meal. I was exhausted by the end of the day, and I used to ask myself, is it really worth it, everything that I'm doing? But after a few months, my limp walking to work was gone. I don't know where it went, but I was happy to see it go. So I'd gone back to walking like a normal person for a few hours at least. And then my limp would be gone in the morning and over lunch. So it would only come back in the evening. And then a few months later, it would be gone completely. And now I don't have a limp at all. And I walk about 5 kilometres a day.
Wow, that's amazing. So as a final question, how do you think then that overcoming MS has affected you overall?
Well, I remember when I first joined the Facebook page, I read this quote that said, "The day you plant the seed is not the day you eat the fruit." And that is something that has always stuck with me. So one thing that OMS taught me is that recovering from MS is possible. It takes a lot of really hard work. You have to be determined. You have to plan everything. And it takes a lot of resilience, but it is possible. So OMS, in my opinion, has been and will continue to be for the rest of my life 100% worth it.
Thank you very much for that. That is an incredibly inspiring story, and thank you for joining us on the podcast, Lieza Vanden Broeke.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Living Well with MS Coffee Break. Please check out this episode's show notes at overcomingms.org/podcast. You'll find all sorts of useful links and bonus information there. If you would like to be featured in a future Coffee Break episode or have any suggestions, please email us at podcast@overcomingms.org. You can also subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. Living Well with MS Coffee Break is kindly supported by a grant from the Happy Charitable Trust. If you would like to support the Overcoming MS charity and help keep our podcast advertising free, you can donate online at overcomingms.org/donate. Thank you for your support. Living Well with MS Coffee Break is produced by Overcoming MS, the world's leading multiple sclerosis healthy lifestyle charity. We are here to help inform, support and empower everyone affected by MS. To find out more and subscribe to our e-newsletter, please visit our website at overcomingms.org. Thanks again for tuning in and see you next time.